Good evening, and welcome back to the Pastor Study. John chapter 10, verses 14 and 15 say this: I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. Sheep are interesting animals. To those of us who drive past them on the highway, they look like sheep. White, fluffy animals that we know get sheared once or twice a year to give us the wool that goes into our clothing. We look at a crowd of people and we see faces. That's all. We may know one or two in the crowd, but basically they are nameless, faceless people that we see passing by us in a mall or downtown or wherever we may find ourselves. And yet, the Father looks at us and knows us individually. Why did Jesus use a metaphor for sheep in talking about this issue? Well, you see, there's a special relationship between the sheep and the shepherd. Some years ago, as I was pastoring in North Dakota, I helped one of the members of my church shear some sheep. Now, he had just slightly over 90 sheep. When I walked out there, they were 90 dirty, smelly sheep because they'd been pinned up in the barn for 3 or 4 days because it had been raining. And you walk in the barn and the smell literally bowled you over. At least it did me. But I looked at the sheep and I saw animals to be sheared. But my church member looked at those sheep and he knew them by name, over 90 of them. He could tell me what day he bought them. He could tell me how much they weighed and how much he paid for each one, and he could call them by name. I thought that was pretty amazing because he was well into his 70s when we did this. But there was still more in this sheep and shepherd metaphor to be unlocked for me. Because he sent me to the back. He had 2 men coming in to help him shear, and he sent me back to the pen to open the gate and bring out 3 or 4 sheep at one time. How hard could this be? So I opened the gate, and I walked in, and I expected 3 or 4 to try to make a run for the gate. The barn was closed, so I'd let them out of the gate, and then I'd slam the gate shut behind them. They had other ideas. I walked into that gate, into that penned-in enclosure, and as I walked in to try to move sheep out, they just kept moving further away from me. And I'd move into the middle of them, and they'd just swirl around and come in behind me, but they weren't going anywhere. They weren't walking out of the gate. They weren't doing anything. And then something happened that opened my eyes. Frankie, because that's who I was working with, the gentleman I was working with, Frankie from the other end of the barn called those sheep by name. He called out 3 of them. And lo and behold, 3 sheep walked right out of the gate, right up to Frankie, and stayed there beside him. I came out, much chastened, and closed the gate, wondering what had just happened and how did it happen. Well, it's simple. Not only did Frankie buy them, and he spent time with them every day, he fed them, he watered them, he took them from pasture to pasture, and they came to know him. That's the metaphor Jesus uses for our relationship with him. That he knows us. We're not a nameless, faceless person to him. We are his creation. And he knows us individually by name. He knows what we do, and he knows the things that we don't do as well. Now, how does that play out for us as we come into Christmas? Well, Christmas is a difficult time for many people. They remember loved ones who are lost. As a police chaplain, I've had to do a number of death notifications over my career and telling people that a loved one had passed away in another place or in an auto accident or in some fashion. And sometimes that's been around holidays, and that's made it very, very tough for those folks in future holidays. People who are alone. I mean, face it, Christmas is supposed to be a family time, and yet many people are alone with no family. And it gets lonely and sometimes a bit depressing. People in nursing homes that nobody comes to see, despite their hope. What I want to share with you tonight, and this is kind of the point I want to make. With Jesus, we're never alone. He knows us by name. He calls us by name. And just as a shepherd can walk up to the sheep and pick him up or wrap his arms around him or do whatever needs to be done because the sheep knows him. He knows him by face. He knows him by smell. He knows him by the sound of his voice. And as Jesus says in the same passage, his sheep follow him. So he comes to us during the difficult times, during the lonely times, during the depressed times, during the times of the holidays where nothing seems to have gone right. And he calls us by name. And he says, take my yoke upon you, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. His desire is that we allow him to take the heaviness, the difficult things off of us, and let the peace that passes understanding that he offers us fill our hearts and minds, as Paul says, in the knowledge of Jesus Christ. As we approach the holiday, as we approach Christmas, remember, it's certainly about family and gift giving and all the things that we've made it. But at its very core, it's about much more than that. It's about God become man so that we can know God. That's the incarnation. It's about the Father coming and wrapping his arms around us because he loves us, because he gave his Son so that we could have a relationship with him. So when the tough times happen, or your cookies burn, or somebody can't come for Christmas, remember, we are his sheep. He is our shepherd, our Father, our loving Father. And despite the circumstances, despite where we may be at the moment, his love for us has not changed. He calls us by name. And if we will but answer, I think we'll find our lives frequently turned around. And I share that with you tonight from the Pastor's Study, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Goodbye and God bless.